You are listening to GMR Radio. And now, the Great Movie Radio Show.
All right, everyone. Quiet on the set. Places. We've got a show to make here. Are Chris and Gabe ready? They are. Okay, everyone. In 3, 2, 1, and... Coming to you live from sunny Orlando, Florida, it's the Great Movie Radio Show, a movie talk podcast starring Chris and Gabe.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Great Movie Radio Show. This is Chris.
And Gabe.
And we are happy to have you on for another episode. We have with us today a dear friend of mine. I had a great time working with him at the Great Movie Ride, and it's been a long time since we've talked. But Michael Warriner's on the show with us today. Welcome, Michael, to the Great Movie Radio Show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, man. It's a pleasure. Michael, you worked numerous positions at the Ride, if I remember, including coordinator and character and just all over the place, trainer. I probably just named everything you did, but if you want to tell us what you were credited with working at the Ride.
Yeah, I think the only positions I didn't do, one of which I wish I'd got the chance to do, would have been character trainer. But I also didn't do show observation, but that was more by choice. The whole leading by example. Once you get that, I didn't want to go that route so much.
Gabe's talked about the hard times of doing that because he's such a goof.
Well, I mean, I didn't make it a regular habit or anything, but if I saw an opportunity to either make somebody laugh with something I was doing or with a tour guide or bandit interaction, I just kind of went with it, more of the ask forgiveness rather than permission.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that was a lot of us. Yeah, like I was like, I may have goofed around, but it was a lot harder for me since I was a show observer and having eyes on me at all times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did characters. I don't remember when I started that, but I know I did get a chance to do both gangster and bandit. I did coordinating part-time. Trainer turned out to, I think, became almost a full-time thing after a while. But yeah, I was trained at most all the attractions in our area there, but obviously had most of my time at GMR in those roles there. So,
how long were you at Movie Ride, Mike?
I want to say I was there at 2012, and I started where I'm at now, 2015. So it would have been about 3 years.
Okay, awesome. I remember you anytime I had you, because I generally just tour guide. Anytime you were in Gangster, and I was coming through and I heard you start your lines, I was like, yes, because you were like this intense. I felt like I was watching Cagney sometimes. You really embodied it. You go around the corner and have his animatronic, and then you came out, and it was almost like you were not mimicking, but you were inspired by Cagney. And I loved having you as a gangster when I was tour guide. It was so much fun, and I couldn't tell if you were actually mad at me or not, but sometimes it looked like you wanted to actually kill me.
As anyone who knows me would say, that I always seem to just carry an anger to the whole world. So gangster was a very useful outlet for me. But I'm glad you liked what I was able to do there. So look, I experimented a lot with gangster, with how I do the voice, when I do the when I would do a point and how I would point, and it was almost everything I did was planned. But it was also partly written by the tour guides, because as I would do something new, and then if I get feedback from them whether or not they like that or not, then I would decide whether or not I keep it and move on, or keep it. So it was kind of always evolving. The gangster, I felt pretty confident in. Bandit, I never got that kind of confidence, and I wasn't, by the end of my run, I wasn't able to make a character I was satisfied with.
Yeah, I feel that. I mean, I was primarily with Gangster, and then I would, every now and then, if the Canaans were on vacation, or if Jose had the day off, or Corey wasn't there, like, I'd have the chance to jump into Bandit. And that one I was like, would play around with, but I, like you said, I wasn't as confident. Where Gangster, I was like, all right, I've done this for 4 years now. I think I got it. And
And I said that not a lot of people get all that much time in band. It was the woes of seniority, but I enjoyed the time I did have with it. Just by the end of the round, it wasn't enough time to have as much fun with that role as I had a chance to have with both tour guide and gangster.
For sure.
It was always a pleasure working with you. I can definitely tell you that. Do you have a thank you? Do you have a favorite section of GMR?
Well, I appreciate the details that were in almost every single section that they had. And anytime I'd be stuck in a section, whether it be on a dead show or opening or any of that, I suppose I found myself looking around the gangster scene a bit more. There's a lot more reading material in gangster than there was in a lot of other scenes. So trying to find all the details they put in, what could this possibly be referencing, and so on. I felt there was, more details just with that scene alone, especially with how large it was compared to some of the other ones than there would be in, say, Raiders of the Lost Ark section, where you have like the 3 or 4 main things that are hidden. Once you've seen them, though, there's not that many more new things you can pick out of it. But, Gangster kept my attention.
All right. You were there quite a bit, so I can imagine that you walked through the alley quite often, just taking a look at all the details and stuff. Do you have any cast members or any fellow ex-movie writers that you want to give a shout out to? Maybe anyone that trained you or anyone that helped you along the way, possibly?
I'll always be appreciative of Betsy, who was my trainer for both tour guide and characters. Even at some point, I think I shadowed her for trainer and coordinator too, so she was there for the whole thing. And I was slightly different when I first started with at Movie Ride. I was just taking a break from the field I had worked prior and needed some time to get my head straight. But Betsy had a lot of patience with me, and it paid off to where I could have fun with an attraction like this, which I had never worked before. It was always a pleasure to work with Dave Fesky and Jackie Skelton. So anytime I saw that they were on the schedule, I knew it would be a good day. Like not necessarily like ideal Disney cast members, but even to my mind, even for like ideal people, these are the kinds of people I like to learn from and work with. And I'll always be shouting out as loud as I can to Sean Cumberland, who always made every day a joy.
Oh, Sean Cumberland. We're going to have him on the show down the road too, hopefully.
And now it's time for Top 5.
Well, Gabe, do you want to review Michael's top 5 favorite films?
Yeah, for sure. We will jump into it. So it's partially one of my favorite films, but I like the second one a little bit more just because there's a lot going on. But your number one film is Back to the Future.
Mm-hmm.
So what about it? Just like, do you love?
When you go to like how most stories are structured, it's entirely different, and yet it's taught in like almost every film school now is like the perfect way to construct a script. But it's unusual. It's where it's like the main character doesn't learn anything. There isn't any message behind the story other than he's able to empathize with his parents a little bit more. It's just a sit-down fun ride from beginning to end, in my view. Not to take away from the second. I do like the second one a lot. I like it better than the third, but as I'm sure you can tell from my list later, I have a personal bias against Westerns that I can't get over. So that's why the third one's not to the top. But the second one just kind of saw as a continuation of the first, and I can sit down and enjoy that one just as much as I can the first one. But it's just that dynamic between Marty and Doc Brown, which is never explained in anything. How these guys met? Why would a high school student be friends with this scientist for reasons, and you just go with it, and there's like no suspension of disbelief needed. It's just like, okay, I can get on board with this.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I love the first one. It's just a continuation into the second one for me. That's why it just barely makes it over the first one. And you would hate me because my Western scene was Back to the Future 3.
Oh, no. In fact, the reason I didn't put it and say like on mine for Westerns, because I really don't consider it a Western. I consider it more a sci-fi kind of a thing.
Gotcha.
And I mean, if I would have put, because obviously my Western scene is very blank. I might include the third one in there just to hear, Buford Tannen say butthead when he tries to hijack a vehicle or something.
That's what I said. Hey, butthead. Oh, man. Cool. So we're going to go into the second one. It's been talked about a lot, whether people have seen it or not in this podcast, but The Godfather.
Yes. I'm not, as ironic as it might sound for my time there, and also being the scene I like the most, I'm not big into mafia movies, or at least how they were typically portrayed. I see them as their own genre. I respect it. It's just not for me. But The Godfather took it to another level, which I didn't expect. And I remember still after I watched it for the first time, that ending they had and how it just completed everything so well that I was blown away by it. And then I would sit there, rewatch it, see what else I can find in there. It's, in my view, the pinnacle of what character development should be in a story. In fact, they kind of hide at the beginning which character is actually being developed. And then it's once, again, everything's tied together at the end. It just all it was like so obvious. And it was dark. It was very realistic with cause and effect. And they say it's the perfect, compare it to like the most perfect movie made so far, that or Citizen Kane. Even though I wouldn't go that far with it, I did. It will always be on my top list. It was just such a well done film.
So we're going to touch on your third favorite film a little bit later, but Forrest Gump, just kind of briefly tell us why that's in your top 5.
I wish I knew. It's one of like of two movies, Back to the Future being one, this being the other, where if I'm passing a TV screen and it's on, I have to stop everything I'm doing and sit down and watch it to the end. And Tom Hanks was great in it. I haven't had a chance to read the original source material yet, but I still plan to do that to see what things they might have changed. But I think part of the reason why I liked it is because of how it followed actual historical events. And I'm a huge history buff. That's just how his character's innocence has that significant positive impact in the lives of so many people. It's a nice, uplifting story to watch.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's interesting because it's a fun, I would say Easter egg movie for a great movie, right? Because, you working, Chris, I'm sure Gary Sinise, when he comes, he always stops by the Great Movie Red and has to ride it. And he's always super nice. I've never had him, but I've heard numerous stories where he got off the ride and said, thank you so much. You did such a great job. And, so I thought when I saw that, I immediately thought.
No, I never had a chance to ride with Gary Sinise, but I heard stories from all the other movie writers about him. And I was also going to say, due to the movie, we got depending on which location you go to, a pretty decent restaurant out of it with the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company restaurant.
I've only had their food once, and to be honest, I don't even remember what I had. I don't know. There's a lot of distractions that night, and I couldn't enjoy it for how I wanted to enjoy it that night. So I have to try a second experience with it sometime later, probably in an off season.
I think I've only gone twice, and one I can remember, I was visiting LA for the first time in 2011, and there was one off the Santa Monica Pier, and some friends and I went there, and it was good. I think I just had shrimp of some sort, and no, it wasn't bad. Yeah, it wasn't bad. It wasn't like legendary or like this is the best meal I've ever had. But, going to a restaurant that's themed after a movie, you go in there and you see all the Easter eggs and the memorabilia, and you have fun with it. And it's I guess their restaurant's more based on experience than just the food. But
nostalgia.
It was okay. Exactly, nostalgia meal. And speaking of meals, the characters in your next favorite movie love meals. The Lord of the Rings trilogy, Second Breakfast, 11 Seas, all of them. I'm happy to see that you clumped the trilogy as one film because I look at it the same way, just based on how the movie flows. It was filmed all at the same time. I'm assuming that's why you have to call the trilogy one movie.
Well, no, when Tolkien wrote it, it was all one anthology to begin with. But then even the publisher said, no, this is a bit ridiculous size-wise. What would we consider splitting this up into 3 different books or more or less? And Peter Jackson, if I recall correctly, when he was first pitching this, that he didn't expect to get 3 separate movies out of it approved, so he pitched it all as one movie. And then one of the executives said, isn't this 3 books? Shouldn't we try to plan it out that way? And that's how it turned from 1 into 3.
And he made one of the most brilliant cinematic epics in film history, in my opinion. And it's just, I know Gabe said, him and I were talking before you came on, that he watched 10 minutes of Fellowship and fell asleep. I almost kicked him off as co-host. That's why he's letting me discuss it, because he fell asleep at 10 minutes.
Well, admittedly, it's
not for everyone.
It's for everyone. It's one of those that if you kind of have an understanding of all the background that was put into it, what the world, it's a world building kind of a story. Similar to Star Wars, yes, you can appreciate the films by themselves, but if you understand the expanded universe aspect, it adds so much more depth and meaning to everything that's being done. It takes a lot of either reading or just going on other videos off tangents of the different aspects of the Tolkien world to get a really good appreciation for what it was he tried to make. And it's hard to get that condensed, and even what would it come out to, a 12-hour film if it would put it all together?
Pretty much, if you go with the extended,
well, that's how expansive this world really was. So it's hard to pick and choose which ones can have the biggest impact for the most audience, but I think Peter Jackson did a good job of deciding what to showcase.
I agree. And we're going to review the trilogy later on when we go around the track, because I'm interested to hear what scene out of this whole trilogy, like you said, 12 hours plus of film, you would put on Movie Ride. So that's going to be a fun one. And then your number 5 is Apollo 13. What puts that on your list?
There is a Tom Hanks theme in some of my movies, and love the stuff that he's in. But it's more appreciation of Ron Howard's planning, how he wants to capture each scene, and even the amount of problem solving they had to do of how to both simulate and then actually film in 0G, and which I don't believe until that point filming in 0G had ever been done. I could be wrong. But even like seeing some of the rigs they used just to simulate it of the seesaw horses and how they would keep that just out of camera to where the one part of the actor is bouncing and the camera kind of goes along with them. So just to have a weightlessness feel, and some of the ingenuity they had to do at the time, because up until that point, a visualization of like returning from space and what the atmosphere effects on a window would look like was never filmed before. Nobody knew what to make of that. So they did the best they could from descriptions of astronauts of like fluorescent lights. How can they make that effect work for what the astronauts would see happening outside the window? And there's just a lot of creative problem solving that was done in that movie that I really respect.
I agree. And Ron Howard's always been a very great filmmaker to like watch his attention to detail in his films. A lot of people don't like the Solo movie that he ended up taking over. You can tell what pieces of the movie were probably kept on from the original filming with the original directors, who are the guys who did the Lego movie and the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Lord and Miller. But you can tell pieces that are definitely this was filmed by Ron Howard versus this was, might have been kept on and edited, or this is something that they probably filmed. And I love his trademark that he always has his brother in his movie.
Always shows up somewhere. In fact, Apollo 13 was a main character.
Exactly. Now, I always love that. Anytime you see Ron Howard directing, Clint Howard's going to show up. It's kind of like Sam Raimi and his brother Ted Raimi always showing up.
If you hear another Adam Sandler movie coming out, was it Rob Schneider's going to show up somewhere? Yeah.
You can do it.
It's time to go around the track. Ready when you are, CB.
So what we're going to do now, Michael, is we're going to go around the track, and I'm going to be your tour guide today. Gabe's going to be our character, so he's going to take over in Western. We're trying this new thing where we swap the roles, and I don't know. We're just having fun.
Feel free to do Western as Buford Cannon.
So we're going to go into musical, and we're going to talk about one of your favorite musicals, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And before you begin, this is one I always said I would love to have seen a scene from On the Ride, especially going through Fantasia before you go to Oz.
And that's why I would, from time to time, I said why I wasn't a show observer, would sing the song that he does in the tunnel, not over the microphone, but my first couple of rows got a kick out of it when they knew the reference of what I was doing. But yeah, the tunnel song was just taken straight from the book. It's really kind of haunting, maddening. It just kind of fit the scene, going into darkness, turning a corner, and not knowing what's on the other side.
And plus, the trippy feeling of going into that tunnel of madness, I guess you could say, and then showing up in Oz. It's like, what drug did I take? And what drug were they taking when they built this ride? So what about Wonka does it for you? And why is it one of your favorite musicals, I guess?
Well, from the film standpoint, I don't have a large musical list. There's a few that really stand out to me. I do appreciate more, let's say, the Broadway musical style versus when it gets converted to film. So my preference will always be the Broadway style. But with Willy Wonka, it was more the character Gene Wilder was playing and how he wanted to play someone in an unpredictable manner. Even so much as like his somersault scene was, I think, if I recall the stories correctly, his own planning, where he said that just to keep people guessing on what his character is going to do next, why don't you just come out with this terrible limp, then somersault, and that should be everything they need to know about his character from then on. And he just kind of followed that unpredictable trend. And there's some dry humor that he does with his character that I think just fits so well and keeps it wondering that is he even someone you should be rooting for? Who is the man behind all this surrealness that he's created in his factory? And I think it was just how strange the experience would be being there in person that was kind of more captivating with the film. The music from it is obviously memorable, more with the pure imagination piece and the Candy Garden. Again, setting a new tone for a different side of Wonka. And then as the musical numbers change, it just kind of grows more and more into a maddening feel. But I'd have to say this is kind of top on my list in the musical section, not because it's a musical, but just because it's a very creative, surreal movie with some catchy musical numbers that were thrown in.
Nice.
It's a classic, and I still laugh at it, and I think it's a meme. And I didn't even think about this when I was a child watching it in my grandparents' basement all the time, because I would watch it all the time. But Grandpa, bedridden for years, all this, I want a golden ticket. Oh, I can get up easily. No stretching, no, let me pop my knees real quick. It's been 20 years, nothing. Nope, I'm up. Let's go. We're dancing. That was part of the appeal, was just how magical even that little part was. Like it was a journey and a fantasy almost. And even something like that where you make fun of, this is what really would happen. You'd get up, you'd get your cane, let me sit down and pop my back real quick. It's been a minute. It just felt like you were in a dream almost. And I always loved it.
It was a very upbeat thing. If I recall, even with Grandpa Joe, and I don't know how true this story is, but I believe he was like a soldier in World War, well, not the character, but the actor playing him, and was actually blinded by poison gas or close to blinded. So they had to do some creative techniques to get him to do visual cues, where to look when, with red lights, because that was something in the spectrum he was able to see at that time. So it's kind of with that backstory and trying to say that getting out of bed's the hardest thing for him. This guy's been through some stuff, and he was able to be this very joyous character in an uplifting film. Was kind of surprising.
Oh, I loved watching Grandpa Joe. Like I said, I watched the movie in my grandparents' basement all the time when my grandfather would be down there. And so it was kind of a nice experience for me and my grandfather to watch Wonka together, because I felt like I was Charlie and my grandfather was just sitting there not getting out of bed. So do you have a scene? And it doesn't have to be the tunnel scene, of course, because like you said, you would put that maybe toward Oz. You have a more, I guess we could say, joyous scene, because this is the first part of Movie Ride. We've had some dark ones like Sweeney Todd start us off before.
To set the tone for the rest of the ride.
Try not to. And then we've had some inclusions like South Park. How do you want to start off Movie Ride with Willy Wonka?
I use the tunnel scene because I'd want to still sing that in Fantasia whenever I feel like. So why repeat it? I would probably do the Candy Garden with the Gene Wilder singing Pure Imagination. So I think that's when someone first thinks like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate, they picture them like going down the stairs into that garden, that first initial awe moment. So I think that would be the more iconic one to put on the ride.
That would be a good spot too. And as you were discussing that one, I was kind of imagining how it would fill it with the chocolate river and all the different candy flowers.
I mean, you could also do the
music
Ghostbusters being sucked up in the pipe through the river, though that might be a slightly darker tone to start the ride in, but it's all part of the candy. You can still have that in the background while you're singing. It'll fit.
Since musical has multiple movies in it, we try to include one or two. And Singing in the Rain's already on the ride, but you have West Side Story as another favorite musical. The 61 version, I know they're coming out with a new one that Spielberg is remaking later this year, if movies actually do release this year. Yeah. I think the kid who played Baby in Baby Driver, Ansel Elgort, I think he's taken the lead for Spielberg's version, so that'll be interesting to see. But West Side Story, 1961, directed by Robert Wise and Jerome Robbins. What about this movie as a musical?
When it comes to, say, adapting Broadway to film, I think this one tried to please both audiences, and it found kind of like a compromising ground to do it. Like the way the camera would look at some of the choreography numbers versus some of the chorus moments. It's clearly the actors looking out into the audience doing it as though they're on stage. So it's kind of they're putting them in the real setting. However, they're still acting as though they're on a theatrical stage like it was originally designed for in Broadway, rather than just trying to say, what can we take away? What all theater aspects can we remove and then just put it straight with film? As they went back and forth between filming what would be real and then how would it be staged for Broadway. The musical numbers themselves are still very memorable. I probably haven't seen the movie for well over 10 years, but I can probably get through at least half the song of Tonight, just because that's how perfect the melody and the lyrics just fit that moment. So the music itself stands out above a lot of other musicals, in my opinion.
Do you have a particular scene from West Side Story that you'd like to add on to your section?
Oh, I said Disney might take a lot away from that movie with all the social commentary the movie was doing.
Oh no! Don't even think about that stuff. Like I said, we've got Sweeney Todd on the ride.
In the last episode, we had a Rocky Horror,
you can do whatever you want, man. This is imagination.
I think what
here
would be most fitting for the tone of what the play was supposed to be about would probably be Maria and Tony on the balcony singing Tonight. That would probably be the better moment to put on the ride.
Very good, very good. We are going to go into mob and crime with The Godfather Part 1 and Part 2. This one has been on the ride already, mentioned by somebody else, so I'm going to try to go away from maybe the scene that they chose, and because of that, I'm going to lean more toward Godfather Part 2, which is the one I haven't seen. I've only seen Part 1. What about, and we already talked about Godfather a little bit with your top 5. Do you have any more that you'd like to talk about, maybe with more toward Part 2?
Between the two, Part 2 is my least favorite. I understand where they went with the story. I'm just not on the bandwagon where a lot of people are saying it's one of the few exceptions to sequels not being better than the original. I still think the original is better. However, it continued the story exactly as it should have been. I just personally didn't see a need to do a part 2. They told the story that was expected. Again, makes sense with how they constructed it with cause and effect. It just kind of further shows Michael Corleone's descent into ruthlessness. But instead of like in the first film where it's showing how the family is having the influence on him and how he's slowly developing into this more larger-than-life mafia figure, Part 2 does a kind of a reflective thing where here's this larger-than-life mafia figure. Now, how are the characters around him developing as a result of this change? As far as a scene from Part 2, that one's tricky.
While you think, I was going to say, you're probably one of the first people I've heard who said Godfather 2 was a weaker movie than Godfather. I always hear the other way around. from just about anybody who's seen him. They say The Godfather is genius, but The Godfather Part Two just takes it up just enough to be like The Empire Strikes Back of the Star Wars trilogy.
It does do a tonal shift, and it does it well. But it's hard to, in my mind, top how great the first one was. That created the tone to begin with. I mean, Part Two was incredibly intelligent, how it was written, doing both a sequel and a prequel. So you're seeing that Vito and Michael, Michael's father, Vito, almost living side by side at the same age. What were they doing at this portion of their life? With this, Robert De Niro did an amazing job at playing like a developing Vito Corleone. And I would probably go with one of his scenes where he's planning the assassination of one of the mob members that he just happens to be following. And it's kind of the turning point for him of what turns him officially into what would later be known as the Godfather. So there's, if I recall the story details correctly, there's part of a mob called like the Black Hand in Little Italy. And this person was making themselves up to be an important member in that group that nobody was willing to stand up against. And so Vito was kind of fighting for the little guys, and eventually gained the respect of the community, where he was able to pull this off and the community would protect him.
Well, again, I haven't seen Part Two yet, so I don't know about it yet, so I'm trying to make sure I forget
No
that.
Real spoilers given in that one, though.
But
I'm trying to avoid them where I can, but it's been out since 1974. If you haven't seen it yet.
Of course. No, I'm saving it for a rainy day. I can imagine if you feel that Part Two is the weaker of those two, that you don't even care to say that Godfather Part 3 exists at all. If you thought that Godfather Part, because I mean, again, I haven't seen Part 3 either, but I hear everyone's like, that was unnecessary. It's almost like Toy Story 4.
Yeah, I haven't seen Toy Story 4 yet. I've heard it was unnecessary, but still good. I can't say the same thing about the Godfather 3. It was unnecessary, and it wasn't enjoyable. So, I mean, they tried to keep going with. I mean, there was a very specific way that Francis Ford Coppola saw, like the end of Michael's life, and they kept true to that. And still, the standout performance of Part 3 is Al Pacino. So you can still, I mean, how he presents himself as this new, wiser Michael Corleone is still done well, but it was very much unnecessary.
Gotcha. Well, we're going to take a break, and we're going to be taken by our gangster, and then when we come back, we'll have Gabe run you through Western through horror. So we'll be right back on the Great Movie Radio Show.
Shut up, you two. You want to blow our cover? Psst. Hey, you. You're listening to the Great Movie Radio Show starring Chris and Gabe. Don't nobody move until we get back, or else, if you know what I mean.
Warning! Remain on this podcast. The advertisement you are experiencing is extremely dangerous. Proceed with caution.
Autumn Star Entertainment is an independent producer of movies and video. Their goal is to provide Hollywood-level entertainment for low to no budget. Check them out on Facebook.com/Autumn Star Entertainment or on Twitter at AutumnStarENT.
Hey, what are you looking at? Hit the subscribe button to catch more of the Great Movie Radio Show starring Chris and Gabe, and maybe you won't get hoiked.
Here they come, boss!
You look at that, a red light. Running a red light's against the law, and I would never break the law. No more red light.
Hi there, Great Movie Radio Show fans. My name is Dalton Burdett, and I'm here to tell you about the Movie Nights. Well, what are the Movie Nights? The Movie Nights are a small production company out of Orlando, Florida, responsible for award-winning short films, podcasts, and a variety of movie-loving content, and we are also new partners of the Great Movie Radio Show. So, for some more movie-loving content that you guys will probably enjoy, please head over to our YouTube channel, Movie Nights, and you can find the exact link at youtube.com/c/Movie Nights, and also be sure to listen to our podcast hosted by me and my partner Ryan Warriner on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Google Play. And yes, Movie Nights is spelled with a K because we think we're clever.
Time for Chris and Gabe, hosts of the Great Movie Radio Show, to get back to work. I better lay low for a while, the heat's on. On second thought, I could go for some popcorn.
All right, and we're back with our esteemed guest, Mr. Michael Warriner. So now that I am the gangster taking over the vehicle, I'm going to be taking over the next couple questions. So we're going to jump right into Western. I'm sure, just like me, there's not much on your list, but you have, and it's interesting because we've talked about Netflix films, but we've never put them on the track, and you have a Netflix film called The Ballad of Buster Scruggs.
Yes, that was a Coen Brothers picture. It was enough lightheartedness in it that I was able to accept. It wasn't meant to be taken extremely seriously as a Western. As you mentioned, my list is very small for Western. I have a really hard time sitting through them, which is
no worries.
As my father loves them. I've tried sitting down watching a couple. He's big into Clint Eastwood and John Wayne, but at the end of the day, for me, there's a huge commonality with them. It's just always this stoic figure wants the world to leave him alone, goes into town, has to clean it up, has to leave, and then there's spin-offs of the character and so on with that exact same formula. What the Ballad of Buster Scruggs did is they made something where they tried to pay homage to several different subgenres of Western. So it's, if I recall correctly, there were 6 short stories. They're really like no more than about 30 minutes apiece. And they each tell a different kind of Western story. And it's very subversive. It's when you think that, okay, they're going with this trope and this is where it's going to, then they completely turn the table and do something different with it. And it did actually keep me at the edge of my seat throughout the whole thing, just wondering about halfway through. It's okay, I see where they want us to think where they're going, but where are these guys actually going to take it now? It also had me rethink some ways that films could be made, just like with their opening scene. They basically have a singing cowboy, and how they filmed his first sequence was something where I said, okay, I'm set this out for the whole thing. It did something pretty impressive, where he's just doing his tune as a stereotypical singing cowboy might do. But then as they're going over landscapes with the camera and you see like he's going through a canyon now, his echo starts becoming part of the song that he's singing. And it was something I could tell was so well planned and executed that it's like, all right, I'm in this for the long run now. Let's see what else that they did with this. And they didn't disappoint.
Nice. Yeah, I saw your list this morning, and I didn't realize it was a Netflix film. So I immediately went to Netflix and watched the first 15 minutes. And like you said, and if you heard my podcast, my 2 Westerns were Back to the Future 3 and 5 Goes West. So I'm not very broad with the Western genre, but I was very intrigued. I thought it, like you said, was done very well, and it was very interesting. And surrounding those 6 stories around the main character, I'm definitely gonna have to go back and finish it for the rest of the hour and 45 that I had left.
Yeah, because it's kind of a mix of the stories are a little bit connected, but they're really not. It's not like they're part of a bigger world or anything. But they're build upon each other with themes. So it's like after the first one's done, it kind of gives permission for the second one to start and so on. And it's when it ends with its most surreal story, which it's going to be one of those that some people either hate it or love it, where it's really there's no landscapes, there's no shootouts. It's just basically a character analysis between people in a stagecoach, and that's the entire story. How they're kind of tearing apart all the different stories a Western could have during it was, I thought, smartly done.
Nice. Now, what scene from that movie would you put in the Great Movie Ride?
And that one's a little harder because it's made up of 6 different stories. So there isn't going to be one iconic scene you can pull out where you say, yep, that's the Ballad of Buster Scruggs. But I'd say probably the most fitting and what might actually work with the hijacking tune will be James Franco's story, where I guess he was just playing a traditional bank robber and it goes awry, and he's being chased out of the bank by a guy covering himself in pots and pans for bullet protection. And every time James Franco turns back to shoot, you hear a ding, and then the guy shouts, "Pan shot!" And so I think that might be the more fitting scene to throw into there.
Nice. And I mean, I think that's actually would be an interesting movie to put in the Western scene, because just like Gangster and Western, they weren't just like a specific film like other scenes throughout the movies. It was a mix of like all kind of Westerns. So I mean, you could even say that you could put all like little scenes from each story into it, and then leading into James Franco hijacking the vehicle with pans.
Oh yeah, you absolutely could. I said they all told a very isolated type of Western, so they didn't stick with just one trope and then carry that the whole way through. So it did pay homage to Western as a whole. So it would be a good pick to kind of pull multiple scenes from it to put on the ride.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we're going to jump into the next scene, our sci-fi scene. And we're going to dive into The Matrix.
Yeah, that was one of those films that kind of changed how I looked at movies when I first saw it. Obviously, a lot of the stuff from The Matrix has become cliche since it's done, especially with things like bullet time, but that's kind of the always the fate of an original idea. It's doomed to eventually become cliche because everyone loves it. So some kind of bullet time scene would be good to put in there, but there's so much planning went into all the symbolism in it, the philosophical aspects of it. They pay homage to so many things, from Bruce Lee to Alice in Wonderland. I mean, The Matrix is almost like a love story to movies in its own right, or a love letter to movies, where these two directors were just trying to see what kind of new things can they do with sci-fi, or in this case, action as well with it. Like with if I recall, they had like an obsession with numbers in it. And obviously their love for the story 1984 came later with things like V for Vendetta. But they paid homage to that in The Matrix as well, with like the room Neo was in, room 101. And then when you see Trinity for the first time, it's 303, just kind of reverberating off the same line. But I think 101 was like the room where the thought police took you to interrogate you and to re-educate you. So that's what it kind of took out from 1984. So it fit with the theme of what they were doing with The Matrix. But it was also about like showcasing how a manga comic could be filmed. So they weren't looking at like how would Hollywood see these actors interact within the camera. It's how would a manga artist, what would be their eyes in this case. I think one of the better examples other than bullet time for that was where there's a part where Morpheus is running through a flooded room trying to escape. There is a slow motion aspect to it, but then as he's being shot at, there's a bullet that goes through his ankle, and you're not focused on Morpheus's face or as anything else that a traditional Hollywood movie might. You're looking at the foot and you're seeing where the bullet came through, seeing how the blood is now interacting with the water. That's where the focus is. And it's more of, like I said, a drawn art aspect as opposed to a traditional filming aspect, which I thought was a really fresh breath to movies at that time. Yeah,
for sure. I remember, I mean, it came out in 99, so I was around 11 at that age. So the first time I saw it, I was like, what happened? And I had to sit down and like watch it like a couple more times and start really understanding. But I mean, yeah, it's a great film, and I'm not telling you what scene to pick, but like you could just take that part from from Epcot, from Spaceship Earth, and just have the numbers flying over you. But what scene would you put in a great movie ride?
I wouldn't have thought of that one. That one would be pretty good though. Yeah, I mean that is exactly what I've thought of in Epcot too, going down that part of the Matrix. Yep. I would probably, as cliche as it would sound, I would probably do the rooftop bullet time scene with Neo going backwards, and how that might look in animatronics. I'm not sure how they would pull it off, but that was the one scene where you know exactly what it is that you're watching. No questions. That's from The Matrix. Don't even need to know which movie of The Matrix. That's definitely Matrix.
Exactly. And I feel like after that scene and that movie came out, it was like parodied so much. And I mean, you still see it today and people are like, oh, that's from The Matrix, So,
and it's a shame. Is that it was a great idea. It was an innovative way to film something. It took, I don't know how many cameras to do it, and it almost did it like still shots. Nobody attempted that before, and it came out looking so good that everyone wanted to kind of imitate it. So it just became cliche over time, which is a shame because it was a great piece of film editing right there.
And to touch on what you were saying about how a manga would be filmed, the fact that they took, and it was after, I can't remember if the Animatrix came after the first one or the second one, but when they did the anime anthology movie series, The Animatrix, and seeing them take those characters from the films, I think it was after the first one. It was going to be right before the second one when it came out. And you watch these characters translated to an anime style. And you've seen that a lot since then. Blade Runner did it. When they were doing the bridge from Blade Runner, the original, to Blade Runner 2049, for instance. But you watch these characters in the anime format, and you can tell that the way they move, the way that the camera focused on certain features on the films, it's one of my top 5 of all time. I love that movie. It changed my view of film, like you said, forever. And as many times as it's been parodied or mocked or made fun of, there was nothing like that going up until 1999. It brought in and it ushered this new era of what could be done, not just on screen, but the techniques used to bring those moments to screen. So
it revolutionized a lot of
love
visual aspects of film, from how a fight could be choreographed, and like we were talking about before, how would another kind of artist view this moment, like with manga, like with the Chief's opening scene with Morpheus offering the choice with the 2 pills. What the camera hones in on is Morpheus's sunglasses, and what you're looking at is the reflection of the pills and Neo's face within those glasses. So it was amazing. Just the different visual aspects you can throw in to think of film differently.
That's one of my favorite shots of the film, actually.
Now we will jump into the next part of the track, the action-adventure scene. We kind of touched on it before, but let's dive a little deeper and talk about your love for the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
With stories, I have a natural draw to, like I said, the world-building ones. Whether after I'm done with this story, I can go to another medium of some kind and get more out of it, learn more about the world, understand a lot of the relationships between the characters that you don't necessarily see at that 1.5, 2 hour time that you spent in theaters. I'd say when I first saw Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, I was confused by it. I was young and naive at that time. But I also went, because at the time I was being told, it was from The Hobbit. Now, The Hobbit I knew. So when I went to saw the theater, I was expecting to see something that was based off The Hobbit, because I wasn't well versed in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which obviously is based afterwards. So after I got over that initial knee-jerk reaction, and I started kind of understanding where the characters were going with it, and I was fully on board with it by the time the second one came out, and saying, all right, this is a story I definitely need to stick to the end for, just seeing where the characters develop from the Fellowship into this now. And it was just a world that kept growing for me. And though I haven't read the Silmarillion, I have read snippets of some of the stories that are through there, so it's given me, again, more of an appreciation for the world building itself, like the origins of Gandalf and the Nine, Sauron's tales. There's a lot there to take in, and it's kind of surprising just hard to think on what Tolkien's thought process was of, okay, we have all this mythology from the beginning. This is a series of events that happened following hobbits that were popular with his first book for children. Where can these characters go within this same world? And it just built to a level that I didn't expect. And the music added such a layer to it, just like if you were to hear a John Williams film from Star Wars, that is from Star Wars. That's a part of that world. It's not even so much a John Williams song. You kind of think of it more as that's part of the Star Wars universe. The same for me is like with Howard Shore's writing with his music in The Lord of the Rings. Once you hear the theme to the Shire, or the different cultural elf themes, that are scattered throughout. It's unique to that world, and it just helped with that world building aspect.
For sure. And, like I said, I fell asleep 10 minutes in, but I appreciate for what I saw and, and the clips I've seen and everything and just the fandom. And even there's a place down in here in Orlando called Cloak and Blaster, and it's very Tolkien and Hobbit and Lord of the Rings themed and stuff. And I go there and I'm like, oh my God, this is awesome. And it makes me want to watch the movies, and I will watch them eventually. I just, make sure I'm well rested.
Let me know when you're going to, man. I'll marathon them with you. I'll get you through them.
The scenes are so beautiful and stuff. So it's hard to try to pick a scene. So I'm wondering, maybe you want to replace Indiana Jones, or do you want to replace it and lead it into Anubis? Because with mine, I did mine with horror. Mm-hmm. What scene would you throw into the ride?
I'm thinking with Lord of the Rings, as dark as it may sound, is I would want the "You Shall Not Pass" scene to be in there. Because that's when the Fellowship's all together. You can see all the characters. There's a lot of different effects you can play for that moment. How you're going to get an animatronic Balrog is beyond me, but that's Disney's problem, not mine.
And don't worry about the dark thing. My whole thing, I had Scream as my horror, and for Anubis, I had the Ghostface killing the gangster bandit, and then it's actually the tour guide. So the darker, the better.
Well, wasn't there a rumored script where something like that was in there? There was some homage to Scream.
Yeah. There was the horror version of the Great Movie Ride, and that never went into fruition. Speaking of horror, we're gonna jump into your horror film, and I don't think a lot of people would consider this a horror, but I'm very interested to why you chose this movie.
Annihilation, right? It's a lot of the films that are on my list are really much mixed genres, like Back to the Future. Yes, there's sci-fi to it, but there's some people that watch it as a comedy. Some see an action adventure kind of thing. With Annihilation, there were sci-fi elements to it, but for me, it had more of a pacing of a horror movie or a horror story, not necessarily a movie, where they leave a certain amount unknown that they have to unravel. And as they start uncovering things, their situation is just known to be worse and worse. And you don't know what they're going to uncover next, but it's going to be worse. And they did this new kind of creature, which I don't know what it's officially called in the movie. I just kind of referred to it as the screaming bear, which I think will be in a lot of people's nightmares for a while after watching this movie. It was like this amalgamation of a half skull, half actual, grizzly bear mixed in with some human aspects of it. But when it roared like a person screaming for help. And they had a really dark scene where these the characters were tied up in chairs, and this was going through the house, screaming right next to their ears. It's trying to determine if there's anything in the room. And they're doing everything they can to not react to the screams, but it's really a gut-wrenching scene when you say it, but that's one that stuck with me afterwards. It was a really smartly written movie where it kind of explores themes of self-destruction and how human beings are always in their own way. And they do it in a very subtle way. It was written in a way where you don't feel that a message is being beaten over your head or your nose is being shoved into it. It's done where you have to watch it several times. You see, I didn't make that connection, or that makes more sense now. And it's definitely not a watch once and you're done with it kind of a movie.
Now, in Movie Ride, we had a small section for horror, but obviously this is your ride, so you can make it as small or as big as you want. What scene from that movie would you put in the ride?
Oh, just because you're giving me, free reign of darkness, I'd go with the screaming bear scene because there's going to be nobody going on that ride afterwards after being faced with that amalgamation of a creature.
And the screaming bear is the tour guide.
There would be nobody listening to the words of that tour guide after that.
Oh, my God.
You could almost have the screaming bear person exoskeleton thing, whatever you want to call it. I don't want to ruin it for Gabe, but I believe there's some pretty gruesome parts that happened with that bear at one point. We could have the tour guide being one of the people in the chairs that are trying to not be seen, and then the gangster or bandit gets taken by the bear. And Bye. And the tour guide somehow gets away.
There isn't a clear cut. Well, how would you solve that problem? The question is, you don't. You run. There's no smart way to get out of that.
Yeah, pretty much.
To tail it.
Since I have taken the ride back over and Gabe has been fed to a bear hybrid thing, whatever. Hey, you chose this, man. We're going to go into drama and discuss Silence of the Lambs and touch back onto Forrest Gump a bit. So, first off, Silence of the Lambs, I saw it recently for the first time, maybe in the past 3 or 4 months. And I got to say, that was awesome. Anthony Hopkins, like, I wanted to be his friend, and I also never wanted to experience meeting him ever, because he was such an interesting character as Hannibal Lecter, but at the same time it was like this guy creeps me the hell out. I never want to know. I loved it, and it was incredible. And of course, seeing Jodie Foster as Clarice, she was wonderful in that role. What about Silence of the Lambs for you?
Of course, Anthony Hopkins
makes it one of your favorite
I don't think
dramas.
there's ever been a film made where you sit back and you say, you know what, I don't think they could have used so much Anthony Hopkins. It's no, you put him in more. You really, Anthony the heck out of the film. I was introduced to the story first through the book, and I loved the book. Every time you read a chapter where Clarice is going to the hospital to interview Lecter, you're kind of on the edge of your seat that whole time, wondering what's going to be revealed in this conversation. What's the constant cat and mouse game that they're playing with each other? Where's it going to lead next? And this is what made the film for me, as great as Jodie Foster was in it, because she portrayed exactly what she needed to, especially with the idea of a woman working in a man's world, and how much they emphasized this with her, and how they would frame the scenes constantly showing her surrounded by men and how she has to constantly prove herself more than others. But when Anthony Hopkins is introduced into the mix, he just took it to a level that represented the class that Lecter had in the book, while also almost as though he's always keeping a secret, and you're never quite sure what's going on in his mind. So he had that sinister element that he balanced well with what I thought the classiness aspect of Lecter, and just how he would some of his improvised stuff, how that would fit so well with the character that it stayed in the film. Just kind of again a testament to why all films should have more of Anthony Hopkins in it. It was his instincts were right on with the character. But I have often wondered, because I knew that initially he wasn't supposed to be Lecter. In fact, I'm trying to remember the actor's name who was supposed to be in it.
I do know they did one of the sequel books years prior to Silence of the Lambs. What was it, Manhunter I think it was Manhunter, and Brian Cox played Hannibal Lecter, but it was
this
like a
one
different, almost
I don't know why I don't remember his
him.
name right now, but it was the Gene Hackman. There it is. Yeah, he was initially supposed to play Lecter.
Oh, Gene Hackman.
But I believe it was his daughter or his niece talked him out of it, saying that this is too, you don't want to be remembered for this. This is too dark a story. So he backed out of it.
And he wants to be remembered for the Royal Tenenbaums instead.
Yeah, and then Anthony Hopkins, I think, was another risk, but a risk the director wanted, because what he was known for at the time, if I recall correctly, was the Elephant Man. And it was almost a joke to cast him, saying, well, why don't we take the good doctor and make him into this doctor? That pitch was a bit hard to sell, but Anthony Hopkins' performance showed why it was the right choice.
Now you say that, I couldn't imagine Gene Hackman as Hannibal Lecter. I think that would be, and even as his portrayal of Lex Luthor was, lack of a better word, campy. And to have him come in and be Hannibal Lecter, I really don't know, but I can't imagine anyone but Anthony Hopkins playing Lecter. And I still haven't seen Manhunter and seen Brian Cox's take on it, but I hear it's a great film.
As far as Hannibal Lecter movies go,
list.
Silence of the Lambs for me will always be tops. I read the book Hannibal, didn't like it, but said, Anthony Hopkins is in it, I'll give the movie a try. His is still the best performance in there, but as predicted, if the story was bad, there's not much he can do to really save the story. So I'm personally not a fan of Hannibal. Well, I did see Red Dragon in that, but when you hear Ray Fiennes is playing a villain in a movie, it's a take my money now moment. It's, yes, I'm going to go watch that. Ray Fiennes and Anthony Hopkins are great in that. The other one I saw, which was a bit more obscure, I think it was like the Hannibal Rising, I think it was called, where it was supposed to be his origin story, and that was one of those.
Oh, yes.
It's okay. It's sure it fits, but again, you need more Anthony Hopkins in the film. He wasn't in it at all, that I recall. So it didn't have that same portrayal that he made famous. It was just somebody trying to emulate what he could become when he meets Clarice one day.
How do you emulate Anthony Hopkins? That doesn't work.
It's like the screaming bear. There isn't a solution. You just run. You don't emulate Anthony Hopkins. You just avoid it.
There you go. What scene from Silence of the Lambs would you put into our drama section, replacing Tarzan getting stuck all the time?
That certainly wasn't my favorite scene to get stuck in.
Yeah.
With Silence of the Lambs, it would probably interview between the glass with him and Clarice, which of course includes the famous Farber Beans line, which I'm not certain how straight from the book that was pulled, but I know with the sound effect and everything else he added to it. That's just how close he is to the glass, and that suspense moment they're building of what's he about to do. And then he does something completely out there. His lip sound effect with Farber Beans. I'd say that'd probably be the scene I'd put in there.
That would be a cool moment too, because if you have one side of like maybe where Tarzan was, you could have Clarice looking in, and then you're not you're kind of between Clarice and the glass, I guess. And then to your left is the glass right there, and you have Hannibal Lecter.
People aren't freaked out enough on the ride after the screaming bear. They have Hannibal Lecter right next to them.
Yeah.
It'd be an awfully tame moment in comparison.
Let's just put Wonka in here and just screw up everybody's mentality of movie ride. Let's just do it. No, but we're gonna definitely lighten it up a little bit with we're coming back to Forrest Gump, and you had him in your top 5, but he's part of your drama list here, so we're gonna put him on the ride, and I can't wait to hear what part you'd put on, because there's so many good moments in Forrest Gump.
It could very easily be anything from the first few minutes towards the like his Vietnam speech would be a good one. I mean, him doing any form of ping pong or being on the shrimping boat would be good. I mean, there's a lot of moments you can pull from it.
I have to say, if it were my choice, it's been like a GIF that's been popular at last, but it's him on the shrimp boat when he sees Lieutenant Dan on the dock and he's just waving, and you drive by the dock and Lieutenant Dan's next to you, and in the background you just see Forrest Gump waving at you.
Or Lieutenant Dan on the dock, and then the dock or the boat crashes on the other side of the track. And,
yes.
There's my boat.
There you go. I was personally thinking the one when he tells the president he has to pee after drinking all the
I'd say that
Pepper.
again. If you were to try to pick a scene where you know exactly what it came from, even if you hadn't seen the movie, it would probably be their opening scene of sitting on the bench talking about the box of chocolates.
That's about as iconic as the Casablanca scene we were presented with. So I do like that one. I just think it would be funny to have on the ride the line "I have to pee." But Forrest Gump is such a classic film, and Zemeckis, it's so good. So yeah, well, the box of chocolate scene on the bench that would be good, and that'll take some of the sting off
it'd
just
also be
coming
dangerous
by,
potentially to
Hannibal
put the
Lecter,
"I've got to pee" line on there, because at this point in the ride they've been there 15 minutes, and we already get those complaints of where's the nearest bathroom once we exit this thing. So just reminding them that they have to go to the bathroom at this point. I mean, we can get meta and have a soundtrack playing of "Let's all go to the lobby" after this moment. Yeah.
I mean, no, I would disagree. I think after the last 2 scenes, they don't have to go to the bathroom anymore. And then
we'll install filters
will
and
dry them
bags
off.
just in case.
Oh yeah, in case the smells haven't spread enough. That's going to finish the job.
Well, it's not going to be Fantasia. It's going to be The Nightmare Before Christmas, which is your favorite animated feature. Let's talk about that for a minute. What about Henry Selick's Tim Burton-produced masterpiece does it for you?
You've seen My Family's Garage.
I was going to say, I did that haunted house with you
I
about 5
suppose
years
why
ago
it's
with
on
your
my
garage,
top
so,
is just due to how young I was when I first saw it, and just that it stuck with me. If I were to see it now, I wouldn't have the same thoughts on it, because as I always try to analyze the story, reconstruct it, what worked, where's the cause and effect relationships, all that. And if you were to look at the story of The Nightmare Before Christmas, it's really lacking. They have you got a Pumpkin King and you got a mayor. I don't know what the politics of this town works in any way. I guess the Pumpkin King outranks the mayor making decisions, and then there's kind of like a forced relationship put in between Sally and Jack, where he's just ignoring her the whole time, but she's obsessed with him. But yet, this is the ideal romance, so throw it in. So there's so many reasons why I shouldn't like this movie. However, it's saving grace, and why I can go back to it and enjoy it is always going to be the music that Danny Elfman did for it. And though the world makes absolutely no sense to me, why is he assigning children to kidnap a grown man and put him in a bath? I don't know why it happened, but they have a good catchy song to go with it. So I'm on board with it because I love the song, Kidnapping Santa Claus. It's for me, it's more the Danny Elfman aspect. Before I had seen this movie, I hadn't seen anything of that animation style before, which is another reason, I guess, why it stuck out for me. There were just so few movies, even afterwards, that were done in that way, where you can appreciate the stop motion aspect of it and the amount of detail they put into every little character on there. So there's a lot to respect from it. But as far as like how I would judge it now, story wise, it's just more, it did its job. But it's the music that always brings me back.
What was great about The Nightmare Before Christmas, I remember seeing it in the theaters. It was one of the first movies, because my sister was born in 92, and we took her with us to the theater. And I remember one of the few things I remember about being a kid was that moment. And it was snowing outside in Georgia, which was very rare for in October, especially in the early 90s. But we saw it, and I had a conversation with my dad because he didn't know Danny Elfman was doing the music. So that was my dad's gateway into introducing me to Danny Elfman's rock musician repertoire, and it opened up the door for me getting into 80s music, actually, because Oingo Boingo got me into Duran Duran, Tears for Fears, all those. So Nightmare Before Christmas didn't just introduce me to, like you said, the animation and all that, but it was my dad's way of, the guy who did the music for this movie we like did this, and now there's so many other things I can share with you that are similar, and that's why I love Nightmare Before Christmas. I'm very fond of that memory, because Oingo Boingo, when I first heard them, I was like, this is like a Halloween band. This is so cool. He had done orchestrations, Batman in '89 and so many other movies before doing this, but to hear him sing in the movie and compose, he was the Jack singing voice. Yeah, it was so wonderful. I just love the magical feel just how magical it was. It was like a dream. It was the Nightmare Before Christmas. Do you have a scene from Nightmare that you would put on the ride, and you don't necessarily just have to play the same scene over and over on a place that was supposed to be a tornado? So you can do what you want?
The Nightmare Before Christmas. Well, one of my favorite songs in there is their opening intro of This Is Halloween. So that would give a good panorama of the different characters that you can have in the background going through the scene. Though, again, if you're going to go for iconic, the What's This portion of the movie would probably be a better fit.
Either of those would work, really. Personally, if I came into Great Movie Ride from Forrest Gump to This Is Halloween, I would immediately want to get off and go if Not So Scary was going on over at Magic Kingdom or something. That would get me in the spirit like that. I would be like, I'm ready. Let's do this Halloween time.
Into Christmas theme during the holidays.
Yeah, the Nightmare Before Christmas ride on our end, that would have been amazing.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Good. There's so many things they could still do it. Bring it in. We don't care. And you could even have the characters, like they have the actual actors. They could have them come in on the ride, like for a special occasion once in a while. And we're going to go into what was the Wizard of Oz. And this is the portion of the ride that Wizard of Oz was this giant, epic, interactive piece at the end. Since the ride didn't really bring many comedy aspects to it, maybe some script and some wit here and there. And of course, the finale, the montage. We take this moment to kind of give comedy its due. And I really think for an interactive ending piece, your favorite comedy, Ghostbusters, would just, I can imagine coming out of Nightmare Before Christmas, and you just hear the theme just starting up, something strange, and you're just going in. Yeah, I the moment I read this on your list, I was like, yes! It's almost
Universal,
like
yeah. And this past year, I was
Gabe
the coordinator at Halloween Horror Nights for the Ghostbusters house. So when I saw this on the list, I was like, yes!
I remember, he was working one night, and I actually went through the house. He brought us in. He was like, yeah, come on, and brought us in. And it was my first Horror Nights, because I don't do that stuff usually, even though I worked the one with you. We, had fun with that, you, me, and Sean Cumberland. But I don't like going through them at all. The Ghostbusters one was probably my favorite one out of all of them, and I love that movie a lot. Bill Murray, Ramis, Dan Aykroyd, all of them. Ernie Hudson. I love the Ghostbusters. What about this movie makes it your favorite comedy?
Just to hear the pitch meeting, I mean, you can sum it up in just a single sentence of, it's about ghost custodians. I'm sorry, what? Ghost custodian. Yeah, they clean up the city from ghosts. Was that a problem before? Is this an issue that needs to be solved in New York? No, just think it'd be fun. All right, let's do it. Listen, with comedies, this was a hard section to fill out because I usually don't go for full length, feature films that are comedy. They're usually really hit or miss with me because obviously the style of the comedy is going to be the same from beginning to end. So if those first few jokes don't work for you, chances are those last 72 they put on, they're also not going to work for you too. But with Ghostbusters, I'd say it was probably the closest I've come to finding what I guess not only myself, I've heard others describe like my dry humor. Well, that would be flat out it. It's just Ghostbusters. It's these strange things are happening. Cue in sarcastic comment here. And and that worked for me. So the premise is just unreal. Just the idea of people in janitor suits going around fighting ghosts because that's a problem in New York. Sure, why not? But so with the second one, I don't think on too much of it. It's always going back to that original. And does it make sense to have a gigantic marshmallow man enter a movie where he had no place in it before, no mention to it at any point that this could be a thing? No, but it's it was a random idea. It worked, and they went with it, and they did it unapologetically, and I loved it.
It's a classic film, and I'm so happy that we've had some resurgence. And I remember being a kid in the cartoon. Being a thing, the Real Ghostbusters, I think it was called, and they changed Egon to a blonde, and that was kind of weird. It worked. It was the 90s. You could do whatever, or the 80s, 90s when it came out. I can't remember what year.
The cartoon.
Like I said, Egon with blonde hair was kind of weird. But are these the same people? The recent resurgence. We've got a sequel coming that's supposed to be to the Ghostbusters that the son of Ivan Reitman, however you say his name. Sorry if I butchered that. He told stories of being a child on the set of Ghostbusters 1 and 2 while his dad, Ivan, was directing it. He feels that it's a wonderful pleasure to be able to continue the story in the way that his father brought the first two to the screen. Jason Reitman, he's doing the Afterlife sequel that sadly got pushed to next year. It was supposed to come out this summer. It's the kids or grandkids of one of the main characters, if you haven't seen the trailer. It's going to be a spiritual successor and have connections to the original, unlike the all-female one.
First excited to hear about it when I heard some of the cast that was there as well. I loved what they did on SNL. I look forward to seeing what they do with it. What I felt the second one was missing that the first one did well, and first one did it really subtly too. What's again establishing the differences between the characters, and it was how they interacted with each other that kind of let the comedy flow. I kind of felt that in the remake they did, that it was like a bunch of characters fighting to be the funny one almost. Like they all saw that one persona they wanted to be, and they were kind of, in competition to be known as that one, rather than having these distinctive characters that everyone can pick. Oh, this one's my favorite, or I'd want to have a drink with this one, or I feel it's just the distinction between the characters for the remake was a bit blurred, and that's why it didn't do it for me. But the first one, it's very clear who they are. The over optimistic one for trying to remember all their names in order now. So we got the genius, then we have Beckman for just the sarcasm, just going with whatever's happening, and it's terrible that that's the top of my list for comedies. I can't think of what the characters' names are. But,
you're good.
Right.
It's been a minute. Egon's just the one that sits out to me because of Do, Re, Egon. Do you have a scene that you feel would be proper and I guess we'd say interactive enough, kind of like dissing the witch and telling him to screw off? Do you have something in Ghostbusters that you feel that the movie writer, the tour guide, bringing this car of 70 people through would be interactive enough and a little bit of a party?
Just for
I guess
laughs'
you could say.
sake,
We had all the Munchkins
if
singing.
you really want to push the limits at a Disney park and do the whole Keymaster Gatekeeper routine,
Yes.
but I think
I would love to.
Other than that, I can't think of like a direct interaction, like dialogue-wise, that would work. But I would prefer to see like the Ghostbusters on the rooftop, and the gigantic head and the arms of the Marshmallow Man coming up, and I don't know, they get the tram gets covered in foam or something afterwards because.
Oh no! I would transfer.
I would be there, man. Or I would be so for that. But then if the foam doesn't work, then it would suck.
Right. The only thing I could think of is like maybe replacing with the witch with Zool. Yep. Like when they get on the rooftop and she's like, "Are you a god?" And he's like, "No." And it's like, "Then die!" And then shocks the whole car, and the car shakes. But it's actually really just the charge.
Anytime someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes. Yeah, that'd be excellent.
The whole car shakes, and everybody's like, "Oh my god, it's so real!" And you're like, "No, that's just the charge plates."
One last thing I want to say that I meant to say earlier: Blazing Saddles is in your comedy
because I like Blazing Saddles and I don't like westerns.
There we go.
Awesome. Michael, we're going to bring it back in the dock now because we don't have a montage to sit through. Thank you for being on the show. It's been such a delight having you and just talking about some of your favorite movies.
The Screaming Bear, it got me. I want it. If I cannot get Ghostface from Scream, then I want the Screaming Bear.
Oh, no, it would be... that would be fun to experience. But yes, Michael, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. We'll have you back again soon, definitely, to talk some more of your favorites and maybe some movies you haven't seen and some other movie and film inspirations. Thanks for being a part of the show, and thank you all for listening to the Great Movie Radio Show. We appreciate you. You can listen to us on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, any of those. Visit our new website, www.thegmrshow.com. You can see a few top favorites from Michael's list, plus we'll be adding his list soon to our Letterboxd account.
I was really excited to see some of your movies and how you put them on the ride.
It's been fun. Thank you.
The Great Movie Radio Show is recorded in Orlando, Florida. You can visit our website at www.thegmrshow.com. Art direction and logo design provided by Mr. Bayless. Voiceover and intro work provided by Dave Fesky and Joe Erickson. You can find our podcast on multiple platforms, such as Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and many more. Music provided by the YouTube Audio Library. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram. Just search The Great Movie Radio Show or The GMR Show. This has been The Great Movie Radio Show. We hope you enjoy your day, and we'll see you at the movies. The stuff dreams are made of. Goodbye, everyone.
You have been listening to a GMR radio production.